Thank you, and hi, everybody. So as you know, the president has just announced that we will purchase and donate 500 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine to start a real push to get the world vaccinated. This is, I think, American leadership at its best, and it is part of a broader plan that includes the 80 million doses that we are sharing that the president's already announced, and efforts to get producers to produce more supply this year, even as we invest in local manufacture in a number of countries that we think can bring more vaccines online by the end of the year. It's our very strong view that given the lack of coverage around the world, it was absolutely critical to make a big move like this to get more vaccines into the system as quickly as possible. These vaccines will become available as of August, even as we are pushing out the 80 million doses that have already been announced. As you know, the president is going to be in the G7 summit. We've been working closely with our allies for the last several weeks on this and look forward to further announcements at the summit itself. Happy to take any more questions on this. I think I would simply say, as somebody who has worked on a lot of viruses in my life and this pandemic since it started, we think this is going to be a game changer in finally starting the flow of vaccines around the world in order to bring this pandemic to an end.
Site.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, how would you prioritize? I know, no one country is more needy than
Right.
the other and so on. How would you prioritize and distribute these vaccines around the world?
Right. Of the 500 million new vaccines that the president just announced, as you rightly suggest, there is need everywhere. So these are going to be allocated to the 92 COVAX AMC countries, advanced market commitment countries, and countries in the African Union. That's a total of approximately 100 countries. These are the lower income countries that it's harder for them to procure vaccines on the market and to self-finance. And we've got real problems with undercoverage of vaccines in those countries. So that's the universe of countries to which the 500 million vaccines will go.
Come on.
I just want to make the 4 billion versus 3.5 billion clear. So US had committed $2 billion through COVAX and then said there would be another 2. And then when it comes to the 500,000 doses, the cost was set to be 3.5. So is that 3.5 as part of that 4, or is it on top of it?
Yeah, we're entering into the final stages of the contract now, and the funding will come out of already appropriated funds. And as we get it finalized, I'd be happy to go through that with you.
Right. And on Latin America, I'm just wondering if you will be directing doses to specific countries in Latin America, or you will allow COVAX to do so.
Yeah, so there's two flows of vaccines in addition to those vaccines that will come through COVAX on the basis of our financial support. There are the 25 million first tranche of the 80 million, and then these 500 million. In those cases, we will work with COVAX, but we will also have some weighing in on what countries we want to focus on, and that's based on several things. We want to get global coverage. We want to be able to focus on countries where there's a surge or they may be considered a hotspot, where there's a real risk because of incidents. And we also want to be responsive, particularly in our own hemisphere, to the many requests that we've had.
Mom.
Yes, hi, thank
Hi.
you. Hi, thank you for doing this. My name is Mohammed Al Ahmed with Al Jazeera Arabic. I have a couple of questions. So, what type of vaccines are we talking about? Are we talking about Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, or a mixture of all of those vaccines? And also, are we talking about first step that would be followed by other steps? And how do you assess the global response to COVID? Does it require a more US engagement, or do you think that the world response so far is doing pretty
Sure.
good?
So on your first question, the doses that we are sharing from our national supply, so that's the 80 million doses, those are a combination of J&J and Moderna. And then the 500 million that the president just announced are Pfizer.
Okay.
So that's your answer there. I think what this means, and the president's been very clear about the role of American leadership in this response from the first announcement he made on sharing doses. And it is absolutely his intention to lead. But as he has pointed out, that for us to be successful and operate at scale, then it's got to be more than just the United States. We're prepared to be out front and leading, but we certainly need to work with our partners. Our partners have in general been very, very supportive of the international response. We've been working with them, and we're quite hopeful that what will come out of the G7 is an even more extensive response from our partner countries. So we're looking for more there. I think that over time, this is going to demand continued U.S. leadership. This is a pandemic that affects the entire planet. We are still at the emergency level in too many countries. As we all know, the humanitarian and economic impacts of an unchecked pandemic create further damage to lives and livelihoods. So this is going to be an extensive response, and we're prepared to stay fully
And
engaged.
talking about the origin of the vaccine, does this mean that China has to step in and do more in terms of vaccine distribution to the world?
Well, I think, we believe, and I think the G7 believes, that it is our role to do two things. One is make these vaccines available, to donate them, particularly to those countries that can't afford them. And the second is to provide them on the basis of no expectation. These are tools for ending a pandemic. These are not tools for creating pressure or trying to exert influence.
Thank you.
Just go.
You said that the rest of the world needs to do more. What would be for you a good outcome from the G7 in terms of target of doses donated to the world after the 500 million
Yeah.
announced by the president?
You'll forgive me if I don't want to get ahead of the summit itself, but I think we need a forward-leaning commitment through the remainder of this year and into next year. And additionally, whatever we may announce collectively at the G7, we're all going to have to continue to up our game to get this pandemic to an end.
Matt.
Can I just ask you, are you seeing the same kind, anywhere near the same level of vaccine hesitancy or outright rejection overseas that that we're seeing here? And is there a component of this program for education, for kind of encouraging people in countries, in the countries that are going to be getting these vaccines,
Right.
to actually take them?
No, it's a really good question. The fact is, we're seeing vaccine hesitancy pretty much in every country for different reasons, but I think it's a common feature, just as we've seen it here. And then there's also both misinformation and disinformation. And in its role in the humanitarian global health response, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has programs that are for, among other things, vaccine readiness. So how do you get a country really ready to implement? And part of that programming is to work with local trusted interlocutors, to work with local journalists, to work with others, to try to get information out there, just as we have done here, about the safety and efficacy of vaccines, so that we can make sure that as many people as possible are vaccinated.
Right, but that's USAID. I'm talking about in the G7 context. Is there something something similar that's going to be
Yeah,
attached to this?
I think what you can assume is attached to this is all the G7 members are involved in the provision of assistance that supports delivery, right? Supports delivery and distribution.
Supported delivery is that would include education and that kind of.
In most cases, yes. I can't speak to every member of the G7, but that's something that countries themselves are very focused on, because they want to make sure they get the coverage that is going to protect them for the long term.
Take a couple more questions.
Can I just follow up? I'm curious about the decision making behind which countries are getting these, and you said you'll be focused on countries where there's a surge, and of course, Western Hemisphere. But I am wondering if countries that China has already given vaccines to, are you looking at that at all as you game out, decide where the U.S. is going to be giving these vaccines to?
Yeah, I'd say two things. The reference to Latin America and so on, we have two streams of vaccines, right? We have the 80 million doses, with the 25 we're in the process of moving. In that, we have looked very much at global coverage, at being responsive to surges, but also to the requests of our friends and neighbors. In this 500 million dose allocation or contribution, we will work with COVAX on that, and our goal here is coverage, is to get the kind of coverage that's needed. There's methodologies that you can use to figure out how you narrow the scope and the opportunity for the virus to replicate and mutate. We'll be taking those things into consideration. We will be looking at countries whether they have supply or not, whether they can add a particular kind of vaccine. So there are going to be a number of considerations that we'll put in place along with COVAX and countries in the regions to make sure we got the smartest allocation.
Michelle?
Follow up real quickly on that. There's been criticism on the right about this administration working too much with multilateral institutions or groups like the WHO, which just has Syria now on its board. I just wonder how you counter that. Why does it make sense to work through these international organizations?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. And some of these allocations out of the 80 million we're going to do bilaterally. But COVAX is built on a platform, the Global Alliance for Vaccines, which is something the United States and both parties in Congress have supported for almost 20 years. It's the main provider of childhood vaccines around the world. It was the provider of the vaccines in outbreaks of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So it's a known entity. That's number one. Number two, we think it's quite important, in addition to whatever we might do bilaterally, that there be a multilateral commitment in this as well, that the world is standing together to say we're going to end this pandemic. And organizations like COVAX are critical for that. Similarly with WHO. We can always look at improvements in organizations, but we need these international institutions to solve global problems. And so it's certainly our intention to do what we can multilaterally, but also act bilaterally.
Cool.
Forgive me if you addressed this already and I missed it. You said the vaccines will become available in August. Can you talk about the timeline from August for them getting into arms around the world?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to predict how long that will take, but they will come available and start moving in August and then be available on a monthly basis through the end of the year and into 2022. Our intention is to work with COVAX to move them as quickly as possible into the countries where they're needed, and then obviously to deploy them as quickly as possible.
How do you mean monthly? I'm sorry, how do you mean monthly basis?
I mean that 500 million vaccines are not going to appear in August, right? It's going to be a subset of those. I think it's in the range of 50 million will be the first availability, and there will be more vaccines every month. As they come available, we will move them out, and then as they land in country, there will be plans to deploy them through national vaccine plans.
You said earlier you think this is going to be a game changer and finally starting to bring an end to the pandemic. Should the U.S. have done something like this sooner, and is it enough?
Well, I think there's more for the world to do. There's no question. And I think that, look, I as an American citizen am enormously grateful for what the president has done to bring the pandemic under control in this country, and that's his first and his primary obligation. But he's been very clear since the start that once there was a level of comfort with where we are with the pandemic in the United States, we would immediately turn to leading on the global stage, and he's done that. And I'd remind you that one of his very first moves was the provision of $2 billion to COVAX to move that forward. I think all of us are going to have to continue to stay on the case. As the president has said, we're going to continue to lead on this. We will continue to do more. We're going to expect and work with our allies and others so that they do more as well. But I think we're in this for the long haul.
Abby?
Apologies if I missed this as well, but is there any specific effort or attention being made to help refugee populations, particularly in refugee camps where COVID-19 has obviously been
Yes.
such a problem?
Yeah, we've got a focus on that in two ways. Through the State Department and our Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, we are providing assistance that is targeted towards refugees and the impact of the pandemic on those populations. As well, there is what's called a humanitarian buffer available so that there are ways to reach, say, refugee populations in a given country. So that is something that between our international partners, the State Department and USAID, we're focused on those disenfranchised populations that are hard to get to. So yes.
Let's take a final question in back.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. It's Sebastian Fest from Infobay, Argentina. Would like to know whether there was any reflection in the government about giving some vaccines to Venezuela, even knowing the big political differences between both countries.
I think our view has been that vaccines need to be available to citizens everywhere if we're going to end a pandemic. Whether or not we are the ones that provide them is a different story. So I can't speak to the specifics of that, but I do think in principle, it's our view that vaccines need to be made
But there
available
was
everywhere.
no debate. This was not even an idea. I mean, there was no debate.
I'm not going to go into what the internal discussions have been about how we allocate vaccines, but to tell you where the guardrails are. One is that we think vaccines need to be made available everywhere. And as the United States, we're going to do everything we can to maximize coverage. But also coordinate with other countries and also other donors so that we can make sure the world's in fact covered.
Thank you very much, Coordinator Smith. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Please come back anytime.